Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Entrepreneur Expat. It's Amanda. I'm writing solo dolo again today because I'm bringing you another interview with another one of my business internet friends. Today I'm interviewing Wani Iris Manley Esquire, all about her digital nomad adventures. She's lived in multiple different continents. She currently lives in Paris, France. So it's a really cool, interesting episode where we talk about how you need to actually have a real business because it makes it a lot easier to move around. How in order to have a real business, for example, she's a lawyer. It's a very traditional type of employment and profession. She talked about how sometimes you need to think a little bit outside of the box in order to make a business and also digital nomadism as a business owner work. We talk about how she got residency in France and how that worked. I talk a little bit about my residency process in Mexico. We compared notes on healthcare in France versus Mexico versus the US. We compared notes on how to rent places in other countries. We had some business talk shop there to help you guys really plan and prepare your businesses to be able to move overseas. And we also talked about the things that we noticed as Americans living in other countries, going back to the US for the first time after spending an extended period of time in other countries, and what that experience is like, and some of the shocking things that you notice when you head back to the States for the first time after being an expat for a while. It's a really juicy episode. We had so much fun, and hopefully you find it really valuable and educational as you decide where you want to go or how you want to set up your business. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. It's your girl, Amanda, one half of the Entrepreneur Expat duo, and I am here with Wani Iris Manley Esquire, who is one of my business friends. We've known each other for a while, and I put out a call on Facebook and I said, who are my six and seven figure entrepreneur friends living in other countries? I want to interview you. And here came Wani, who's living between two different time zones. So we'll talk about that. And then it turns out we're both from Miami, kind of, sort of. And we didn't know that up until now. So welcome to Entrepreneur Expat. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with, six and seven figure entrepreneurs who want to optimize and make the move overseas, and also aspiring location independent lifestyle entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much for having me and actually creating a podcast just like this, because I think it is so needed.
Oh, it's a hot topic, girl. Hot topic. I mean, Justin's interviewing somebody else right now for the podcast who literally helps Americans move their businesses overseas. And he was telling us, like, we're busier than ever. Like, we have to optimize all the operations just to deal with the influx because everybody's trying to leave.
Yeah, I sense that when I was in the US a couple of months or weeks ago, actually.
Oh, we can talk about that because we can talk about, going back to the US after being out of the US for a while and what that experience is like, because it's a little shocking. So we'll get there. Okay, so before getting there, who is Wani? What does she do for her business, and how did she end up in France?
My goodness. So I am a TEDx and award-winning speaker on change and entrepreneurship, and I'm also a business and IP lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 20 years, and I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years, and I've actually been a 5-time expat. I've lived in multiple cities within the US. I've lived in Liberia, where my family is from. I lived in Spain, I lived in Italy, and now I live in France. How I actually ended up moving to France, or I didn't actually choose France. France actually chose me. Essentially, what happened was that New Year's Eve in 2010, I woke up. I had plans to go and party with my friend at his house in Coconut Grove in Miami. And I made this like super abrupt decision to just stay at home and like not party, but to actually look at my life. And I did this like whole day organic, like just, starting from, okay, what went right? Like meditation, yoga, what went right? Then write down those things that actually went wrong. And I had a really horrible year in my business that year. And I just took 100% full responsibility. And I went through each and every single one of my failures. And I asked myself, okay, what happened? And the short end of it was like, I was actually a brand new entrepreneur. I knew nothing about actually how to running a business, but actually how to be a lawyer. And I also was in love for the very first time. And really my head was just way up my then partner's ass. And so I really wasn't focused in business. And so, which means like, I was just really unstable. And so I just ended up kind of like looking all of that. Then I began looking like, what were my beliefs about myself? And I went to like self forgiveness practice. Then the rest of the day, I began to just to visualize, to write down everything I wanted to be, to have, and to experience in the coming year. And then I was doing like visualizations about it, affirmations. When midnight came, I took one sip of glass of my champagne and I passed out because I was just so exhausted, because it was at 6 o'clock that morning. And what ended up happening was like 3 days later, my entire world in Miami began invading all of these signs about Paris, 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 France, French this and French that, which was so bizarre because I had zero connection to France. My family were from Liberia. It's not a francophone country. It was never colonized by the French. And so it just made no sense like whatsoever. And so like for an entire year, I kept getting all of these signs about Paris, Paris, Paris. So one day in August, my heart just spoke to me and said, move. I was working on Brickell Bay Drive, in the Morton building at a client's office.
I'm aware.
And and my heart just said move. So I ended up selling my place. I sold my condo in Miami. I sold my car. I gave all my things to different charities. I came to Paris. I didn't know a single person. I didn't know one word of French. I had no plan A, B, C whatsoever. I just like literally came, and I came in the winter. And that's how I got here.
So it was an intuitive thing, right? How you ended up
It
in
was,
France. Yeah.
yeah, it was spiritually guided, spiritually like I would say it was never my ego that brought me here, because I was never thinking about that. In fact, prior to, I mean, I studied, like, did part of my legal studies in Italy, and I always wanted to go and work in Italy because I'm infatuated with like Italian culture, Italian men, Italian everything. And so it was never on my radar. So it just came out of left field. And I just essentially trusted whatever was calling me here. I mean, it was just so strong literally for a whole year. Every day was like sign after sign after sign after sign. I'm like, you know what? I have to go. I had no choice but to come.
Did you figure out after landing there why the pull was so strong, or did anything kind of stand out to you in terms of like, okay, now I get it?
Well, I can tell you, I came to me on a podcast, where I was being interviewed, and it just came to me, or it dawned upon me, that actually I have actually had so many prior lives of in France. And actually, one of the part of the stories I didn't really say was that when I was getting the signs in Miami, I actually came to Paris, for my birthday, because I wanted to, okay, what the signs were all about. I initially came here for 4 days. I was kind of like in this like meditative state, like asking God, okay, what's the sign? And I got nothing. I said it was so freaking cold. And I came dressed like I was in Miami, because I didn't, we don't have winters there, right? And I got super sick with the flu. And then I ended up going to the Riviera for the very first time. And I was visiting a friend of mine that I met in Miami, and his wife. They had invited me to stay in NT. And I remember like going through like all the different cities on the Riviera except Saint-Tropez. When I was in Monaco, I had this like very strong insight of like deja vu, where everything and everyone looked familiar to me. Like I had lived there before, but I'd never been there before. In fact, Monaco I felt more at home than I ever was like in the United States. And so it wasn't just like later on I made a connection. I was like, oh my God, that was actually like in my previous life. I used to live in Monaco, and I was remembering that. So for me, it was just a very strong past life connection. And I've had many energy healings where, in fact, when I first got here, I was always told that, um, for my soul, it's like coming home. It's like, it's just like where my soul really feels where it wants to be, where it just connects with. But it's like, if when I'm here, it's like at a soul level, it's like, for me, it's like Disney World. But it's my body at the time that was just so connected to Miami, was like, and that was kind of revolting against me. So yeah, for me, it's definitely like a soul-led mission when I actually came here.
That's
Even if I
very
didn't.
cool. Yeah, no, a lot of the people that we interview, myself included, it's just like very practical, right? So for example, Justin, who's the second half, he's like, yeah, I ended up in Latin America because it was low cost of living, so I would have more cash flow and it was better for my taxes. You know? And some people just do it that way. He's like, I'll go visit Western Europe, I'll go borrow it. He's from California, so I guess he's just done with taxes.
I get it.
He's from California, so he's like, I am so over this. He's like, at Florida, I'm just going to Latin America. Like, just gonna go to like an extra one there. Also, it's easy to get residency in Latin America based on income versus
Okay.
other parts of the world. So in Latin America, you could very easily get a residency based on your income.
Okay.
But for example, in Asia, it's more based on like your wealth, although they have the
Right.
nomad visas now. And Europe, I'm not sure. I mean, our landlady actually tried to get citizenship in Spain. She's Mexican, but she could have, she qualified. And it was like a nightmare. She was like telling us how complicated it was and all that kind of stuff. So he's like, yeah, I'll borrow Western Europe
Yeah.
with all the extra cash flow that I have from living in Latin America and not having to pay as much in taxes.
I get it. Here, I know in
Yeah.
France, it depends on like what country you're coming from and based on what the reputation is. Like, for example, in France, we Americans actually have most favored nation status because number one, we come here with so much money and we're putting so much money into their economy. Like we
Yeah.
don't come here to actually take away from it, whereas everybody else is just coming here to actually take. We come here to invest, and so for us, it's like the government wants American people here, point blank. So they give us. So for us, it's very easy to get a visa. I mean, there's so many different types, but if you say, for example, if you're coming from like North Africa, they definitely want, North Africans here. They don't want British people here because British people come here for the healthcare. But for
Mm.
us, it's very easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how each country, what's one of the things I've learned, each country has its own nuances when it comes to like immigration and all that kind of stuff. I just got my residency in Mexico, so I was just at the immigration office and seeing like all the different types of visas. So like for example, we have temporary residency for 4 years, but it's only because they wouldn't give us the permanent because that's basically for retirees. So then we
Okay.
would have to like renew it in a year and then renew it again after three, and then we get permanent, but then it might affect the tax situation. But at that point, we're probably somewhere in another country. So depending on depending on what's going on with visas. Do you have residency in France or okay, you do. So what was that process like for you? Because that's one of the questions that we get asked the most on this podcast is like, okay, can you have like US citizenship and a residency in another country at the same time? And I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm a US citizen, I have Mexican residency. Um, so that's one of the number one questions we get asked. And I know every country is different and has its own nuance. So what was that process like for you?
For me, so I am a French resident. I pay taxes here in France, and I also pay taxes in the United States as well too. So initially when I first came, because of the way that I came, why I share this story is because like I say, it wasn't like a practical move for me. So I wasn't quite sure I was actually supposed to be living here. So what I did was initially I came with nothing because Americans can come to the Schengen region for 3 months with nothing or a tourist visa, right? And so I kept kind of going, and then I had to go back because at the time I was doing litigation work. Like my practice is mainly IP and business and transactional work, but I did have a bunch of spillovers from like my transactional cases that were kind of leading to litigation. So I had to go back to Miami to kind of finish those out. And then when I initially came, I began to research. I did get France and a lot of European countries have what they call a long stay visa, which they'll allow you to be here for a year, but it doesn't allow you to actually work. You actually have to show proof of income. You have to show you're making a certain amount of money and that you actually like are not going to come here and be a burden on the state. And you have your own insurance, things like
Yeah, same
that.
in Mexico. Yeah. Yeah,
So
you have to
initially,
show
I
that you're
actually
not a
got
burden.
that. Yeah, so initially I got that because I wasn't quite sure, like, am I supposed to be living here? And then like I ended up staying. I was like, well, actually I kind of like it here. Like, okay, if this is a country where that has the most coveted healthcare, like why would I not, why would I not be able to avail myself to all of that, right? And so what I did was I ended up researching what the visa that I actually should get. It's called a professional liberal, which meant that I actually had to open up a business here. So then I went back to Miami and I actually got a different visa and then I came back. And that's what I have now. So I had to set up a business here in France. I pay taxes. I contribute to their social security system. I can do pretty much everything except vote, which I don't really care about voting for their politicians here. And yeah, that's how it's worked out.
Yeah, and I'm really glad this is coming up because I think a lot of Americans think that they could just go to Western Europe and be like, yeah, I'll just stay for like 4 or 5 months in Italy. And it's like, no, that's not how that works. You have got what is it? You got 3 months and then you better leave and then come
Days.
back. Somebody we just interviewed on the podcast, she's in that situation now. She's doing the digital nomad thing until she figures out where her and her family are going to stay, but they're in Western Europe right now. She goes, oh yeah, we've been hopping around because of that 90-day. So, they were like changing every 2 weeks. And then now they're extending, they're going to be in Spain for 90 days. Then they have to leave the region and come back. So she's like, yeah, well, we're going to have to park it somewhere.
Hard because you're not, and it's very hard to create from you're in that space because it's for entrepreneurs, right? And I want people to know that you've got to have like a landing, like a place to
Yeah.
where you can actually called to work because I know for me when I first got here, that wasn't my issue. My issue was actually looking for an apartment because I didn't realize it was so difficult to find an apartment. Like it's easier for us in the United States. And so what
Oh
I found
yeah,
like,
renting in other countries, I don't think people realize how complicated that can get. So like here in Mexico,
yeah,
well, we can compare notes. That's part of why what this podcast is for. So here in Mexico, there are loopholes around this. We found them. But here in Mexico, typically, if you're going to rent, you need to have a cosigner who owns property, who will put up
yes.
that property as collateral. So we had 10 days to find a place to live. And I'm like, what do you do? Just like bribe somebody at a restaurant and be like, hey, do you want to put up your collateral for a foreigner? Like, how does that work? You know? But no, there's legal loopholes. They just have to do, at least in Mexico, it's called like an alternative contract. And the
Yeah.
landlord just needs to be okay with it, and you put more cash up front, and you're usually okay. But a lot of people don't realize that renting in the US is actually a far easier process than in other countries.
It's the same thing here in France where they actually do require like, a guarantor, but I got really lucky. Like no one ever asked me for, and I just really honestly credit that to just like God, the universe, like protecting me because I got the call and I just came, you know what I mean? I didn't question, I just actually came. I just felt like, but there's so many other people because I'm in a lot of different expat groups and I hear their horror stories, but it's like getting a freaking MBA here where they're requiring like, like a huge dossier, like a huge file. And like for one apartment, it's like about 50,000 people like waiting to get the same apartment as well too. So it's like there's such a very high demand and low supply. And so yeah, it's a mission here to get an apartment. So, but it's very, very important for people, for your listeners. It's like you've got to look into that issue because it's like it's not the same as it is in the US. Not at
No,
all.
not at all. Not at all. And I think the reason my name couldn't be on the lease was because I didn't have a Mexican bank account with which to
Okay.
pay, and I didn't have a bank account because I didn't qualify for one because I wasn't a resident. So for people interested in Mexico, there was a time that you could get Mexican bank accounts as an American if you are on a tourist visa. But because there's so many Americans overextending their tourist visas in Mexico right now, they're cracking down and they're making it more difficult.
Yeah, and absolutely because and even because the law it's in it's called FAFSA, where like our government, just like this is what Trump when the Trump administration what he did, which is requiring foreign banks of American expats, if there's more than $10,000 in the bank account, they actually have to report to the American government, or the American government's actually finding these banks. What France decided to do was to stop actually opening bank accounts to American expats. And
Oh
so like
yeah,
it's
that's the thing too. Yeah.
yeah, it took me a long time to actually like, and to get a bank account, and I actually just kind of gave up. And it just like, I don't know, one day it was like one of the during elections, I was like watching one of the debates, and I was like, dear God, like, please. And I just tried my luck, and I just one bank gave it to me, but I had to like basically give up like my whole arm. They were
Mhm.
asking for so many like documents, and I'm like, I freaking live here. Yes, like here. I mean, but yeah, it's like everything's a mission. Yeah, and I finally got the bank account. So I'm so
Yeah.
grateful to have a bank account here.
I don't know if you've seen this guy called Nomad Capitalist, but he was on an interview the other day. And that's like a whole expat offshoring libertarian type thing. But he said
Uh,
something the other day that was so funny when it came because they literally help people get residencies, move to other countries, that stuff. And he's like, everything's easy and nothing's easy. I was like, that about explains the expat experience. Everything's easy and nothing's easy.
yes.
It's like that
There's a
sums it
level
up
of
really well.
complicated. Yeah, there's a level of complicatedness that you just aren't really prepared for. Like when you finally commit to the actual like being in these cities of actually living there as a resident, that people we aren't prepared for. Yeah, but
So
it's part of
I,
the adventure, right?
I want to hear because you brought this up, and I was actually literally just working on a video about this. So I would like to hear your thoughts because you brought it up. One of our clients in our effortless sales engine program, which is where we help our six-figure clients basically automate their businesses and run very efficiently. So if you want to go live in another country, it's a whole lot easier to deal with the complication.
Yeah.
You got the time now. But she was sending us all these articles about that have come out recently about people saying like, digital nomad life doesn't work, or I tried the digital nomad life and I failed, or it's not what people think it is. And I would find that the common denominator was like, none of y'all know how to run a business.
Absolutely agree. I'm actually doing a periodical right now, or a publishing, and I was asked this question, like, what do I feel like are the three strengths that I have that's actually kept me in business for so long? And I was like, one of the things is like, I'm not afraid to work, and I'm not afraid to work hard. And I said, I find what's wrong these days is that because of the internet, because of Instagram, everyone's romanticizing being an entrepreneur and having an LLC, and everyone's like, okay, I'm working from anywhere. And I'm like, it's not what people are portraying it, what it is to actually be. And I was like, that level of work, like even like finding out like from an energetic standpoint, it's like I realized like when I was constantly here, always looking for an apartment, I was in survival mode. You know what I'm saying? Not from like a money perspective, but just like from a space perspective. And you can't really like create from that space, right? And I'm on top these whole beach pics of like people, it's hard to work from if you have a serious business, you're not working from the beach.
Yeah,
You're
that's
not.
actually, yeah. I mean, we have other videos, episodes coming out on this channel on why we chose Guadalajara over, Vallarta or Cancun or Playa del Carmen or Tulum, which is what most Westerners do. And I'm like, because it's like literally impossible to run a business
Yeah,
from
you
those
need Wi-Fi.
places, and we're entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and like the Wi-Fi in these places are not very stable, like you
No,
actually have in the US. And so when
no.
people are saying like, yeah, it's not working, it's because you're buying into, I go, first of all, running a business is hard. I don't care what anybody else is saying, and I mean, being an entrepreneur is quite difficult. There's all these like different moving parts, right? And a lot of it too is like we're learning as we're growing and as we're scaling too. And it's like you've got to have these like fundamentals in place, right? Like great Wi-Fi connection and these different pieces and like operations and this and that. So yeah, it's not. I think it's from a you have to take off the rose-colored social media glasses and really get real of this is a corporation that you're running, and if you wanted to make it sustainable, and even if unless you're living off of, I don't know, if you've got property in the US and you're living off of like, I don't know, the rental income or something like that, but if you're in a state, the state where what you're doing overseas has to work, you've got to get really practical, like to the brass knuckles of like your space, your operations, and like, the know-hows and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, we call it the difference between, running an actual business and being the typical broke digital nomad that people see
Right.
on social media with the great pictures. I mean, that's why for us, we just decided to park it in one place for a while. Speaking of internet, the house is hardwired just in case, and everything's on a battery backup.
Yeah. Those
Just
things
in
are
case.
so important. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to me about, because you're an attorney, so you have more of a service-based business. For us, it's a little bit different. We do a lot more trainings and things like that, unless it's with our seven-figure clients and it's more like on a consulting basis, but we don't trade as much time for money, which is one of the things that we're big on. Doesn't mean it can't work as a business. It's just how we don't want to do it, you know?
Yeah.
So how do you manage to have a law firm, and you're traveling between two different countries, and you not just traveling between two different countries, living between two different countries, but you travel a lot. So what are some of the tips that you have for people? Because to your point, otherwise you're going to end up like these broke digital nomads crying on Vice.
Yeah, first of all, what I've also done is that I have actually taken like I'm not a traditional lawyer. I never actually have ever been like that, right? And so first and foremost, when I decided I was going to be coming here, I had to stop saying no to any litigation, period, right? I had to make my business completely transactional, meaning like it's all by computer or it's all by the phone or by the internet, right? That was the
Yeah.
first, right? That was the first thing. And then also too is like, when you're doing, if your business like how everyone's pretty much operating now, which is like through internet and Zoom and things like that, you can do it from anywhere. And again, that's why I was realizing, going back to the whole, okay, the infrastructure of the actual where your space is at, right? Then what I also did too, I actually created a digital product business as part of my law firm. So for example, in 2020 during lockdown, which I spent here in France, I saw everything was going digital, right? I'm also a speaker as well too, and rather than actually like putting myself out there as like, let me just speak virtual. I said, no, I'm going to see where everything's going for the future. So what I did was I created a legal template business, actually serving like the online space and coaching, right? So I began to really like then actually utilize like my social media, providing like legal information, begin actually like promoting that business, which then brought business to my actual law firm, right? So I created a products-based business to go along with my service-based business. And I actually just kind of like, I operate both of that. And now even with the speaking too, I utilize my social media quite well as well too, with both of that too. But you actually have to find, and for people that are like, for me, in traditional service-based business, like, from the regulated professions, it's like, we're gonna have to kind of get out of the old outmoded way of thinking and kind of get with the whole program, which is actually being online, having like, utilizing social media and having some type of course, something you can actually sell that doesn't
But
require you.
leverage is what you,
Yeah, to leverage,
yeah,
exactly. You can
yeah.
actually scale and have all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is so important because our favorite word is leverage. That's what we teach all our
Yeah.
clients in Effortless Sales Engine. We're like, how can you do, one action, but it's going to get like 5,000 output, from an efficient, or like, how can you use more technology to do a lot of the heavy lifting? So for example, for us, and moving around forced us to figure this out. Most of the business is automated on the back end. So basically my job and Justin's job is make sure the machine is working on the back end and market like crazy.
Yeah.
And that makes it a whole lot easier when you are moving around and wanting to explore different places, or even just wanting to have a life again. It's all about that leverage, but that leverage requires a different way of thinking than what most people have been taught.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about, because I always find that a lot of people don't realize, when you've been out of the US for a while and then you go back for the first time, like how shocking it actually is. So I just did this, we'd been in Mexico for a while, and then I went back to the US for the first time because I had to get my residency. So I couldn't be living off a tourist visa and the holidays and work conference and all that stuff. And it was actually quite shocking in a lot of ways. So what was that experience like for you? Because I was just interviewing somebody else, 6-7 figure business, but she's doing the digital nomad thing in Europe right now, and she hasn't been back to the US yet for the first time. And I was like, oh, just you wait.
Man, for me, so when I first came to France, I equated to like landing on the moon. And then when I went back to the US, it was like landing on Mars, right? Because I find that I've become very Europeanized in terms of like, I like my European lifestyle of, walking everywhere. I live in the center of Paris. I love going to my supermarket like every day, and it's like,
Yeah,
I
we do
like
that
that.
too here. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just, and and going to get fresh bread. And so I just really like that. And going back to where actually driving every day, and I was like, holy crap, like how did I ever, and having all that expense of like the car note and the insurance. And I'm just like, holy crap. No, so it was very shocking for me. It was also very shocking to be in my old community and just seeing people kind of like not evolving or just kind of like just maintain like the same life. And just having to reconnect with that, it was so difficult. I couldn't do it.
Were you shocked by the food? Because that was one of the things that got me, where I was like, wow, the food in the US doesn't taste like real food.
Yes. In
It has
fact,
no
I couldn't eat
flavor.
it. You can taste the chemicals. You can taste the
Yeah.
chemicals. Like, especially, I know what you're saying. Like the food in Mexico tastes like real food. It's like you
Real food. Yes. One of my favorite things about Mexico. It was definitely high up on the list on why we chose it.
Yeah, and trust me, I love going there just for that. I love like the chilaquiles. Like I eat that like all the time whenever I'm in Mexico, you
Yeah,
know?
you wouldn't think that's like breakfast food. Like it's kind of odd to an American to be like nachos for breakfast. It's not really nachos, but like just to give a visual to people who may not know what chilaquiles are. And you're like, I didn't expect this to be breakfast food, but this is pretty great. But to your point, I mean, we can get fresh eggs in the corner
Yeah,
store. We're in Guadalajara, so there's a lot of agriculture around Guadalajara. It's how the city even came to be. But what's cool
yeah,
about Guadalajara, because you're in Europe, is that Guadalajara, depending on where you are, either has a very European vibe or has a
okay,
very Latin American vibe, and it's got a very cool kind of mix going on of the two, because apparently Guadalajara is where, most of the Spanish Europeans came when it was
okay,
founded. And there's a lot of old money here from the
okay,
agriculture,
okay.
from the agriculture. So it's like easily accessible, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you could go get fresh eggs in the corner store, fresh bread. There's fruit stands everywhere. And the
Yeah,
food tastes like even a banana. I was like, wow, the banana here tastes so much different than it does in the US.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was sad too, because I mean, there was one point I remember I was eating and I was like, I could just taste the chemicals because now like my
Yeah.
palate at that point had gotten so acclimated to like, eating the food here in agriculture. And I actually learned that the organic foods in the US was considered organic isn't even allowed in France. So that should tell you like what the hell like we're being sold over there. It's like everything's just so toxic. You can just taste the toxicity and everything. So I actually found myself actually not eating as much and actually losing weight now when I go by
That
there.
happened to us too, right? Well, no,
Yeah.
over there we gained weight, but we were also on a cruise for work. So like there's no way you're not gaining weight on a cruise. I mean, it's just not happening.
Yeah.
Right. But when we came back, right, it was like, wait a minute, we have to eat less in order to actually feel satisfied, which
Yeah.
was another thing that we noticed how in the US you had to eat more in order to feel
Right.
satisfied. You could be eating the same damn thing and you still feel like you have to eat more in order to feel satisfied. That was one of the things I noticed, and how here we actually eat less but feel more
Yeah.
satisfied.
Exactly. Totally. Same
Yeah.
thing here.
Yeah, what's healthcare like? Because that's a question that we get a lot as well. Is like healthcare in different countries, or how does that work? Because we're used to a certain system in the United States. That is pretty freaking dysfunctional. So healthcare is obviously a massive concern for
Yeah.
Americans in particular, maybe Europeans and Canadians not as much, although we do have somebody who follows the podcast who is Canadian. And
Hmm.
she said something interesting, which is she said, I've had healthcare in Canada, the US, and Mexico. Mexico was number one, hands down. US was number two, Canada was number three, just in terms of like efficiency and actually getting stuff done and the cost.
You know what? I'm not surprised at what you're saying about Mexico. I'm not about Canada being number three. So for me, I actually have not, even though I'm part of the healthcare system here. So the healthcare system is accessible to everybody, right? And for a lot of people, it depends on your income, or if you are a student, it's actually for free, right? And so for me, like I actually was now actually having to use it because I was having to diagnose stomach pains like at the end of last year, right? And what I was coming to realize was that, for example, like I was asking to have like a mammogram. And the doctor, in fact, who was Canadian, the gynecologist, was refusing to order or give you a prescription for, because just as one France, they only give it to you starting when you're 50 years old. And they only give you a woman a pap smear every 3 years. And I just looked like she had three heads. And I was like, what do you mean they only allow you to have a mammogram on age 50? But then I understood, okay, if this is a whole socialized system where everyone's covered, the system would collapse if everybody was just getting and yeah, it's accessible to everybody and it's cheap, but I'm not sure if it's the greatest. I can tell you, like, a lot of my American expat friends here have all maintained their American health insurance, and they find themselves actually having to go to the US to actually
Oh,
like
that's
to
so interesting. It's the exact opposite in Mexico.
really.
Yeah, because the cost is so low for Americans and Canadians. Like medical tourism is actually a major thing in Mexico.
Huh.
So, medical, dental, and vision. So, because we can just pay out of pocket and it's no big deal. So it's actually, I mean, they do house calls here.
They do house calls here too.
The private
Yeah.
healthcare, they do house calls. We had an eye doctor show up to the house, and like I was like, I didn't even know you could do a freaking eye exam at somebody's house. Or like the dentist, for example, I can tell you that I got a cleaning, three fillings, and I had to completely replace my retainer. And here it
Hmm.
cost me less than 300 USD to get all that done.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like dental, like there's a dentist on every corner and they're all driving BMWs because they're all servicing Americans who are coming into Mexico to get the work done.
Oh my God, I love
But
it.
being from Miami, like half of Miami does that every year. They just go to Latin America to get all their,
Yeah.
vision and dental and doctor stuff, and definitely a lot of plastic surgery going on in Latin America too. But that's for Colombia. For Dominican
Right.
Republic. But yeah, in Mexico, it's actually the opposite. So, as soon as I landed here, Justin had me booked on so many doctor's appointments, right?
Wow.
Because
Yeah.
he's like, get it done. Like, and I was on a tourist visa at the time, so we didn't know like how long I was going to be here. Did get the residency figured out. So, but at the time, I was on a tourist visa. He literally had me booked with so many appointments. He's like, take advantage because
Yeah.
To try and get this level of care at this cost in the US would be impossible.
I mean to go to Mexico now.
Yeah,
Get
I mean,
Mexico
when you
residency.
people do that, they like make trips to Cancun and they're like, let me stop by the dentist while I'm here. They literally do that. Here, let me stop by the eye doctor while I'm here because it's such so much more cost effective. Or the gynecologist, one thing I found really interesting was that they did a procedure here that's just like standard, and literally in 10 seconds they can tell you whether or not everything's good down there.
Really?
Yeah, right. And they're like, and I'm like, wait a minute, what is this? And they're like, yeah, we know they don't do this in the US. It's like a spray or something, and then it kind of hurts, but like in 10 seconds they can tell you, like, you're good.
Okay.
Nothing's abnormal, you're good, everything's fine. And I was like, I've never seen this before. And I was like freaking out, like, right, right. And they're like, yeah, we know they don't do this in the US. Normally in the US, that's something they would have to order after
Right.
they see something that might be abnormal. And I'm like, you mean to tell me they could have been doing the spray the whole time and let us know in 10 minutes, like 30 seconds, whether or not everything is fine? And instead they got us waiting a week.
Wow.
And they're like, yeah, so that's another thing is, depending on where you go, they might have certain procedures and things that you may not be able to get in the US. But that's really, and I'm not surprised to hear that about France, because healthcare is not one of the things that I hear. Like, normally when it comes to like cost of healthcare and the quality of it, I hear a lot more Latin America and like Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
that too. And I would always hear like for the cosmetics part though, but yeah, but even here in France, it's still so cheap though. I remember like
Yeah.
even when I was waiting to get, it's called a Cap Vital here, which just like gives you the health coverage. I mean, I remember like last summer or 2 summers ago, I had to go to the emergency room. It was like $9 or €9, and like with the prescription was 18. I mean, I went to the emergency room at a hospital.
Yeah.
The doctor told me it was €9 and then 18 with the medication. I was
Yeah,
just like,
that might be a little bit different here, but like for example, I don't know if they have this in France, but here, like let's say you've got something common or normal, you literally just go to the pharmacy. There's a doctor at the pharmacy. You pay like 3 USD. They diagnose you and you get your medication like right there.
God.
Yeah, like 3, 4 USD. So if that's like you have an infection, or I had food poisoning at one
Mhm.
point and it was like, yeah, and it's just resolved for 4 USD,
Oh,
problem solved. And then
interesting.
here you get your prescription. That's like common here to have like doctors at the pharmacies with like their offices.
Huh.
Yeah.
You keep selling me on Mexico.
Mexico is great, right? We could talk about the tax incentives on the other when we're done recording here, because we're paying way less tax than you are over in France. I'll tell you
Yeah,
that much.
sure, yeah.
Uh, okay, so tell the people where they can find you, and then we're going to top it off with the number one question where I've never gotten the same answer twice.
Okay, you can find me on my website. It's wanimanly.com. It's WANIMANLY.com, or I'm on the socials, Facebook and on Instagram and LinkedIn. So with my first and last name.
Amazing. Okay, tell the people, what does being an entrepreneur expat mean to you?
Oh my gosh, for me, it means a manifested life. For me, it means, when I was 6 years old, I said three things, which were or two things rather, that I wanted to live between the US and Europe, and that I wanted to have three homes, right? And so I'm still working on the homes part, but I've lived, the multiple countries. And so for me, it just means living like that manifestation of my life. And also just like living a life that I really want, which is a life that allows me to travel, that be infused with inspiration, that allows me to work the clients I actually want to work with, when I actually want to work, the way that I actually want to do, which is like, you're not going to find that very rare. It's very rare you'd find them in a corporation working for someone else. So yeah, that's
Very
what it
rare.
means.
Yeah. And one of the things that comes up a lot with people who want to move overseas, a lot, and everybody will say this, they're like, figure out how to make your own money online. It's going to be a lot easier to get a visa that way.
Absolutely. And
And
I
pack
would
up
even
your stuff.
even if you weren't actually wanting to move, I think everything now, I mean, we're in such a creator's economy, and where
Yeah.
nobody wants to work for a company anymore. Nobody wants to be told when to go to lunch and when they can take time off. And so everyone has to create something online, or some type of product thing they can scale or leverage, or, do like a one-to-many business model.
It's a beautiful thing. All right, Wani, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us. We can talk about taxes off air, because I don't want to say something erroneous. I'll leave that to the accountants and lawyers that we're going to be interviewing on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, we will catch you on the next one.